Ya, podemos, vamos a empezar entonces. Sí, buenos días.
So we're going to start. Good morning to everyone and good afternoon to those that are in other time zones. We know that there are lots of followers for this very important event. We are gathered here together for the 5th edition of the permanent meeting on the elections. And today we are going to talk about the electoral process in Bolivia. To give a little bit more of time to all of you that are connected, my name is Sergey, and I am Kuznetsov, and I'm the chief of the cooperation division of the Venice Commission. This is not only an organization that has European countries, but also Latin American countries, and we cooperate with lots of institutions in Latin America. And one of our members is the INE, the National Electoral Institute in Mexico, and we would like to thank all our dear friends for these opportunities to speak of such important topics with the participation of the very high level or top of the end speakers. With this introduction, I think that I am going to give the floor to the first lecturers or speakers that are going to open this meeting today. So it is a pleasure for me to give the floor to
al director de la UNAM.
to the director of the Law School of the UNAM. Dr. Raúl Contreras, welcome. Thank you very much, Dr. Sergey Kuznetsov. Good morning to all of you, those that are in real time through the media and the social networks. The National Electoral Institute from the Law School of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. We are broadcasting live from Mexico City, but using these great tools that the pandemic has make us use with greater speaks that are today with us from different places in Latin America. The National Electoral Institute and the Law School of UNAM have made a strategic partnership in order to carry out a study through these conversations and meetings in order to make an analysis of compared law between the electoral processes that are being developed or that are going to be developed all along 2021. Maybe you don't know this outside of Mexico, but the first Sunday in June, Mexico is going to leave the largest and complicated election process in history. We are going to renew 15 governorships out of the 32 that we have in Mexico. We are going to renew all the House of Representatives of the Congress, and we are going to resolve thousands of popular election charges, federal charges, and many other positions in Mexico City. So taking into consideration this phenomenon that it's complicated per se, we above this and besides this, we think that we are going to be impacted by all the pandemic issues and situations in order to prevent the spread of this virus. So we were studying the effect of elections in the United States of America that have just changed the presidency and elected Mr. Joe Biden. So right now we are going to study and we are going to take advantage of all the experiences of Bolivia. I would like to greet, first of all, the organizers, Manuel Carrillo, Mari Carmen Alanís, and Dr. Mari Carmen Alanís, Professor Ovilla that has made this possible, this spectacular panel where we are going to have Dr. Salvador Romero, who is the chairman of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal in Bolivia, Dr. Maria Teresa Segada, who is a professor of the Universidad Mayor de San Simón and of the Universidad Católica Boliviana. We are also going to have with us Professor Rafael Loaiza, who is also a professor of the Universidad Católica Boliviana. And we are going to close with Dr. Carlos Mesa, who is the former president of Bolivia, who is going to give us the insight of what has just happened in Bolivia. For those that are in the live broadcasting, October 18 last year, the president, vice president, the senators, and the representatives were renewed. So it was elected Luis Arce from the MAS, the socialist movement, obtaining more than 55% of the polls. The elections were going to be carried out on May the 3rd, but because of the pandemic, they were postponed to October. So let's see if they can provide us with very important information of what you lived, and in some way they have back a candidate of the MAS, MAS, which was the party of Evo Morales. And Luis Arce is right now the president who is considered the economic brain of a boom lived by Bolivia some years ago, that even though he has lost this run and was not able to be re-elected, in a very few time, the non-popular Janine Emmaez, who was the president, and all the information that we have in Mexico told us that one of the factors that influence the most is the bad management of the pandemics. So this makes Bolivia to have the third country that has experienced more deaths after Peru and Belgium, besides the fact that they have some government acts and that were against Evo, and because of the wrong management of when the president of the country back then took oath swearing on the Bible. So without further ado, we are going to enjoy of this great event, and I would like to once again thank to all of you for being participating in this meeting. Thank you very much for your introduction. It is a great pleasure for me to give the floor right now to Mr. Manuel Carrillo Poblano, who is the coordinator of external affairs of the INE. Manuel, please, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Sergey. Thank you very much, Mr. Director Raúl Contreras. Good morning. To all the panelists, thank you very much. On behalf of Dr. Lorenzo Cordova from the INE, the National Electoral Institute, I'm going to give a brief introduction. This pandemic made us equal. A virus that has attacked more than 200 countries and territories in the world. It's not respecting race, social status, economic status, religion, and before a global issue, the electoral institutes would like to share information and global experiences to learn on how to face this new challenge of mankind, but democratically and in a multilateral way. This is the time of solidarity and union. Pandemic has showed us the importance of science, the relevance of public policies with effective categories, and mainly the need to have solidarity. Competencies and individual work isolate us. Regarding electoral politics, in order to have free and democratic elections, we need to lay bridges between the electoral organizations and also among universities who are the source of scientific knowledge in a freedom and objective scenario or arena. So we are summoning experts, politicians, academics, and all the society to do this. Today we have a first-line seminar or course, and we have held already 4 different meetings. Our moderator, Mr. Sergei Kuznetsov, we are laying some bridges so that our voice gets to Europe and some countries of Africa, and to bring them to Latin America in brief. We are going to have academics from Bolivia that are very paramount for these topics. We have Maria Teresa Segada and Rafael Loaiza. We also have people from politics. Max Weber stated that the state was the masterpiece of Occidental rationality, and this rationality is going to have an impact in the management and the bureaucracy, the administration. Calculation and control are possible because of this rationalization, knowledge, and the steering wheel. The administrator knows how to meet the law. That's what Salvador Romero did as a president of the Electoral Supreme Tribunal in Bolivia. Now, Werner said in his paper, Policy as a Vocation, that there were 3 the main qualities for a politician: passion, responsibility, accountability, and to be measured. For some, President Carlos Mesa is part or has these qualities according to the German sociologist. Dear friends, please be ready to enjoy from this ethics, science, and policy buffet in this session, in this meeting. Thank you very much, Manuel, for this introduction, and also for underlying the importance of our exchange, our sharing of information. Unfortunately, we have to change the way of communicating ourselves, the way of cooperating among ourselves. But even in these difficult times where we depend a lot on the new technologies and of the different measures that the countries are taking to protect their citizens, what remains unchanged are the values and the standards that we have to defend, promote, and we have to find new ways to meet our tasks, to meet with our duty towards the citizen. And in this time, we have to change this because the citizen has constitutional rights, and our actions are part of a whole protection system for these rights precisely. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to go to the next stage and to start with our discussions. And it is also a pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Salvador Romero, who is the chairman of the Electoral Supreme Court in Bolivia, to share with us this experience in Bolivia of organizing elections in these difficult times. Please, doctor, you have the floor. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this invitation. I would like to divide my speech in 4 parts. Why the 2020 election was very complex in the democratic part of Bolivia, or history of Bolivia. In the second one, to show the specific pandemics of coronavirus. And in the third one, an analysis of the results, not from the standpoint of the distribution of the preferences, but from the standpoint of the organization of the electoral process. And I'm going to conclude with some perspectives facing the election on March 7, in Bolivia, which is a local election process. So in the first part, I'm going to tell you that 2020 election was the most complex election in the history of Bolivia, and it was before of the pandemic even. And this is due to three main factors. The first one is that we were coming from a point which is very traumatic for an electoral institute, for this political system, which is the annulment of the federal election in October 2019. Please remember that in 2020 presidential election, this is a consequence of the annulment of election in 2019. And that also included that Evo Morales retrieved from the presidency. So this made a difficulty nationally and also in all the departments of the country. We were also coming from a critical situation. In the electoral sessions that we have between these this impact, many of the polling stations were destroyed, were burned. So we have a very difficult scenario to carry out an election. And finally, we had a very brief time to organize the election. 120 days, which may seem a reasonable time between the summoning and the election, if we have time to prepare those 120 days. But in this case, we had to start the preparation of the electoral process almost simultaneously with the taking office of the new authorities of the electoral institution. So we were facing a very complex situation without any of these situations being lived before. So we have added the effect of the pandemic, which was very difficult for the electoral process in Bolivia. We were just 45 days away from the election that was going to be held on May the 3rd, when we had a quarantine with a complete suspension of public and private activities in the country, which made us look for to reprogram or reschedule the date for the end of March. So we didn't know that back then, but we were entering in a tunnel of also 6 months where the country faced difficulties, very, very serious difficulties to redefine the date of the election. So as soon as we had the new date, which was done in the first day of August, we were certain that the election was going to be held on October the 3rd. So in these first days of August, we had 3 laws that were passed trying to redefine the date. The first one has to be at the end of July, and a second time, September the 6th. And finally, we went for October 18, which was the definite date. In these 3 months, in a very difficult and complex manner, we performed several consultation processes between the political stakeholders, state bodies, by trying to define this election date. And we were in the middle of the political and social process that was very complex, very polarized, with antagonic positions, and maybe positions that were looking for the electoral process of 2020 to be given or to be carried out in 2021. So we had the social, political, and regional confrontation that was highly polarized to define the date of election. And the Electoral Institute or body searched for the best consultation possible with all the stakeholders in a very difficult scenario. We also had the population fear, and this was everywhere in the world, of the effects of the pandemic. And there was a specific fear of the elections because they thought that the election could trigger a case or a process of an infectious process, very serious infectious process. So we have some reluctancy from lots of sectors or parts of the population and the citizens to have this date on this date the elections. So we try to look for some health measures together with the Pan American Association of Health, together with which we defined the measures and the modalities that we should adopt in this voting process that were included the signal of to have more more polling stations, to expand the schedule from 8 to 9 hours. We were going to split into this process. The citizens were invited to vote according to the last number of their identification voting card. So these were the measures that we took for the citizens, besides the use of masks and to use alcohol gel, in order to protect the members of the administrators or the managers of the electoral station or the polling stations. And so all the public had to wear masks, to have or to bring their own pens, etc. So which were the results of this electoral process? They were highly satisfactory because of three reasons that I would like to share with you. First of all, we had a very high participation, 88.4% of the population. Bolivia is in the high table of electoral participation in Latin America and even at the worldwide level. Nevertheless, our own average that are not very high were under this 88.4%. It was very high, this percentage, and it is very important to highlight that it was during the pandemic. In the second place, the electoral process or the electoral process has no negative impact on the pandemics. In the 2 or 3 previous work to this process, we had more cases of infection that the 2 or 3 weeks after the elections. And this was because the citizens were very responsible with the recommendations that we all did. They all wear their masks, they respected the social distancing and the lines, and this helped a lot to have an election day that was very safe. And we were also in a phase which was decreasing the first wave of the pandemics. And I would like to highlight the third element, why we can consider that this election that was the most complex because of the conditions that it was done, the political and the health conditions, was also a success. And this is because the results were accepted by the candidates that were competing with them. And we have highlighted all this in a gesture that is very honorable from their part. It is not common in elections in Latin America that the other candidates acknowledge the electoral results. Also, the observation missions and the international electoral missions also provided their full approval, unanimous approval on the fact that Bolivia underwent a very clean and transparent electoral process corresponding to the electoral integrity that we need to have in an electoral process. With this, we were able to solve a first part of the political crisis in Bolivia, which was to reform the electoral and the legislative power with the legitimacy from the results. We didn't achieve to completely overcome this phase of split that continues to be very intense. And I would like to conclude with the perspective that we have for the March the 7th. Bolivia has lived an electoral cycle, which is a whole cycle with the presidential election and the legislative body in October. And now we are going to elect all the local authorities, the governors, the mayors, and also the representatives of the departments. So with this, we are going to close the electoral cycle in Bolivia. And this election, once again, had some disputes about the date of the election, but we weren't at any time in this difficult or complex scenario or very difficult of 2020. In fact, we kept the date that we initially have set. But what is the difference between one and the other situation? Well, first of all, that the citizenship has learned that we can carry out an electoral process with the proper protection measures. The experience in October was, from that point of view, very important, so that all these requests to extend the period or to postpone the election have or provide the safety to the society. And then we have a more fragmented or dispersed scenario, which in these elections are in national elections. And this helped a lot the electoral process to be able to be done or carried out in the scheduled date. So I would like to tell you that for March the 7th in this election, once again, we are going to follow the recommendations of the Pan American Organization of Health. We have repeated our protocols for this electoral day, the election day. I mean, more polls or more polling stations. We are going to divide the elections in different sessions. The same applies for the training process of all the members of the polling station, those that are managing the polling stations on the election day, which are random citizens. And finally, that we have adopted for this day, different from the electoral process in 2020, a protocol that is a voluntary protocol of the political institutions and organizations, so that the phase of the campaigns can be developed by following some guidelines. And with this scenario, we are going to vote on March 7th, completing or closing our electoral cycle in Bolivia, because once again, when we have the next elections are going to be according to the schedule for 2025. So with this, I am concluding my talk. Thank you very much for this opportunity of sharing with you this information, and I am available in case you have comments, questions in the next phase of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romero, for your presentation. It was so interesting. And this was about an electoral process that many people was following it, not only from Latin America, but from all over the world, because throughout political, or in the face of a political crisis, or what you have undergone in your country, the changing of dates, this was not helping the stability and the trust of the voters. However, with the right measures and the efforts, the electoral court and the authorities have been able to organize a process that has been recognized by international observers, and also it has been accepted by the national political forces. This process also proved that if we adopt suitable measures, measures such as segmented days or extended times, or the training of the electoral personnel, or an agreement by the political forces, we can always achieve a very good result in spite of the pandemic. So now I would like to give the floor to our next speaker. And we have Doctora María Teresa Segada, who is a professor of the Universidad Mayor de San Simón and the Universidad Católica Boliviana. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, for the invitation and the possibility of sharing with other world democratic experiences what has happened in Bolivia. What I would like to say first is that Bolivia has a very complex, is facing a complex scenario, as Salvador said, because of the pandemic, the economical crisis, but also it has been more serious because of the consequences and a very deep political crisis between 2019 and 2020. This was a very conflict time for the government, that we have had some struggle between the government and the opposers. And also we have a social crisis because we have physical violence in the streets, for example. So before the elections in 2020, the only institution that could ensure an institutional stability to the country was the electoral body, because the rest were totally undergoing a crisis. So one thing that I would like to state to understand the Bolivian case is that politics has a deep presence and the action of a social society. The big changes throughout Bolivia's history are not translated because of an election of a president, but because of a social pressure, because of the society there in the politics, because it has transformed the whole system. For example, we cannot explain the movement towards socialism in 2005 without understanding the history and the social mobilization since 2000. On the other hand, I would like to say that because of these different ideas, we cannot understand the political crisis of 2019 and 2020 if we do not address these social movements that started after the referendum in 2016, asking to respect the vote and to reject their unconstitutional re-election of Morales, the President Morales. So these protests were disorganized by the society, and they were more critical within the elections in 2019 elections, in the post-election times. So the hypothesis is that these problems, this crisis, this social crisis that Bolivia has undergone has had an impact on the institutional system, because this means, on one hand, to have a President Morales out of the term, the change of elections, the call for new elections, and of course, we have had a devastating transition government and this big social and political polarization. But the effects at a party level, it's interesting to evaluate them. The most interesting case, maybe it's this socialism movement, this official movement that was 14 years in power, and after the election, he has won elections. It has won elections again, with an idea of a renewing. The President Caracora, when he was speaking about socialism 2.0, that was the version. we have lots of expectations that this is going to happen. And it's important because after 14 years, after having a quite monolithic and close line to start as this leader of that party was not candidate and it is not part of the government now, it's interesting because there is this distance between the former President Morales, who is still a political boss and ahead of the campaign, together with the environment, and the new government of Axel Catacora. But this distancing is the set of voices that have emerged towards socialism, questioning the political management of this organization and requesting democratization. Towards subnational elections, this reaction versus this cupola has not only been translated on the way of having these candidates over socialism, but also protest actions in many places, and in the appearance of this grouping from the very core of a mass which is in La Paz, and they have their own candidacy. In Bolivia, we speak a lot of Eva Copa effect. This is a person that is in this. She has been a follower of this movement towards socialism. She was a president of the Senate, and before this candidacy by President Morales, she decided to create her own alternative. So this is very interesting because in this regard, these are very good news for democracy, because now sectors have their own voice and are able to participate in politics by creating other alternatives to citizens. And in the case of the opposing parties, I would say that this political crisis that has been very, very serious, this has not meant a renewal or a different positioning or posing or standing. In the 2020, we have confirmed a great majority towards socialism, and the opposing party it remains with 30%. Typically, the government of Mas have had around 28 or 26%, and in this case, this vote has been repeated by the most important opposing party. But this has not meant an important change, I said, because the opposing parties towards socialism have been having this behavior or reproducing this behavior of this government or this term. And we have the different signs, and we have to think about this because this is very typical in the Latin American countries. We have a great discretion of political parties, parliaments that are not in agreement, an individualism of politics that is the organization, agencies of parties are now in the second place. There are other ways of doing politics today. And on the other hand, in the case of Bolivia, it doesn't have any symptoms like the black market of some acronyms that are owned by others, and the parties have been exchanging this as a source of survival. There's also that citizens are against parties, and the mobilization of citizens is looking for other ways. This is a very important challenge for Latin American politics, but specifically in Bolivia, some alternatives that are able to attract these citizens towards other projects. Whether these issues of the opposing parties are due to the negative positions of a Morales government had imposed in the term as this way of doing politics against other parties. And we're looking at this again with the future elections, and it's so this is not good. And the parties have to think about this self-criticism. The problem of the success of MAS in October last year, well, first of all, it's explained by a transient government that is present in all the opposing parties, because there was this speech used by MAS, and then an association was conformed. These are very difficult times because of the pandemics, the crisis, racism, corruption, with all that political standing, without making any differences at all. So this has helped the positioning of this movement towards socialism again, and also to discard opposing parties, dividing the country in two choices, to make it individual the big differences we have. It means that that is officialism, and on the other hand, the opposition. So the election has set a very important change and constitutional changes, like the electoral body that has expressed and guaranteed certainty in this election. And of course, there was a certain uncertainty of the results. So what is next? What do we have in the future? Expectation from the ARCES president to keep his promises, economic stability, among others, and the promise by President Choquehuanca, because he has said that we have to fly like the condor with the two wings, by cooperating among each other and by following the principles of the good living. So we are expecting this to happen, but the signals or the signs that we have seen are not quite promising. So the subnational elections, just to finish, are given in a quite polarized environment. In the surveys, we can see that there is a dragging of the national votes. Each region has its own characteristics. Many years ago, the regions have become a space for the opposing parties. And mostly in the last election, the subnational one back in 2015, the opposing parties were imposed in some countries, and also in El Alto, and in 4 out of the 9 governances of the country. But El MAS had a very important presence in most of the major offices in the country, mainly in the rural areas. So the scenario then set forward for 2021 elections are foreseeing possibilities of addressing some big changes in the municipalities and the countries, and also to solve the power issues. However, a characteristics of the Bolivian politics, as in other countries, is the big scattering. We have enrolled 122 political organizations and partnerships, and the parties have made some agreements with local leaders, such as Victoria Propia. I mean, there is a different dynamics from a national with a regional. So we do not have to think that the same is going to happen as in October last year. However, we still have uncertainty, and obviously we have lots of tasks to do for the Bolivian political arena. I will just mention some. First of all, the urgent need of having political social agreements in Bolivia to face the urgent matters that are affecting lots of Bolivians. 2, the rejoining or reinvention of the opposing parties to offer alternatives to the country at the national level. And 3rd, to consolidate the institutional strengthening through respect to law. I mean, to stop this trend in the political science and democracy, and the reverse, the political stakeholders are suited to their own party interest. And finally, and this has happened, and it has been very hard for Bolivia in terms of a social and political confrontation, this could mean another opportunity for a renewal and a democratization of the country. But we need commitment for this, not only from politicians, but also from the social and citizen sectors. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Maria Teresa Segada, for your presentation, your explanations about your country, and the explanation about the whole arena of the political forces and the processes that are now seen in Bolivia. And this is happening in many countries, not only in Bolivia. Voters are kind of tired of the traditional political parties. And if there are more political parties, then there is more uncertainty and it is more difficult to work with the process. And the inverse law in parties. And this is being faced not only by Latin American countries, but also in Europe. We have seen in the latest elections, the traditional forces have lost because of lack of trust by the voter. So, yes, we need to reinvent political parties. But in many times, during these transition times, it is when we have more possibilities that we need, if we need to take advantage of the elections to convey messages and to tell voters that there will be a big change and also a big change within the political parties. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now I will give the floor to Professor Rafael Loayza, who is a professor at the Universidad Católica Boliviana.
Ahora sí, muchísimas gracias. Voy a permitir.
Thank you very much. And now I will be sharing my presentation with some data. So we have heard throughout the presentation by Salvador, the head of the Superior Court, and Dr. Maria Teresa, that they have undergone a deep process of social polarization. So I would like to discuss the reasons why this social polarization existed. So basically, I will be discussing the following ideas.
Ahora sí. Primero que Bolivia tiene a lo largo, que ha vivido a lo largo de un
So Bolivia has undergone from the foundation of its republic, basically, but very recently, during the last 20 years, there has been a long period of ideologization. This is a core idea of the ethnic identity basis. And then there are two elements that are used to explain this and how politics have been managing this polarization. And also, well, last year, we almost were into a civil war. And two, how the electoral process has been mitigating this idea. So I will be discussing two. The identity is fixed and a differentiation common origin sense by the post-colonial society in Bolivia. And then the policy is mimetizing a common destination that creates polarization. I will be speaking about the setting of the difference, the politicization of the identity, the pandemics, and I will be defining the electoral scenario of last year. I won't be discussing the results, but I will be speaking about the context around elections. And also I will be sharing some data statistics from the Bolivian Research Center at the Universidad Católica. First, there is an elective affinity between the ethnicity and the elective affinity with poverty. That is, this is concentrated in the population of the original ethnical communities. For indigenous people, the ethnic registry is an action of affirmation of a common ascendant. And also, this is because of they have been imposing many things by the government because of the ethnicity. But the non-indigenous have not found a space so that they are recognized as the indigenous. So they are building this through the denial of this ethnic condition. So these are some data. These are the affinity curves that we have between ethnicity and the poverty. These are the census of 2005 and 2012. And in 2005, ethnicity was 60%, and the poverty was 54.60. And in 2014, after the economic boom of the emerging society, poverty dropped to 66%, and the other one to 49.60. In 2019, ethnicity is in a 42%, and the poverty is in the 44.60%. Obviously, the pandemic has changed these figures. So this is the indigenous population. The non-indigenous, this is an opposing or a reverse curve. Like, for example, in 2005, and these are the dates of the elections of 2005, 9, 14, and 19. In 2005, people that said that did not have an indigenous background were in a 40%. However, the basic conditions were in 41.40. In 2009, 38% were not ethnically identified. The basic conditions were met in 45.40, and we reached 2019, which is the peak of the curve, where we see that 58% of Bolivians were not ethnically identified, and 65.40 said they did not have an identity that is over the poverty line. What I mean by all this is that these are an elective affinity, saying I am an indigenous and my basic needs are met or are not met. So this is important with the politicization between the ethnic ascendant and the income. Now, economy and poverty. We have the differentiator because of the quality of the job, formal economy or informal economy. The indigenous have an informal economy. The non-indigenous also, they have a formal economy. Indigenous, we have the employer and non-indigenous. I'm sorry, the employee and the non-indigenous, the employer. So we can see that to the right we have the bourgeois, and to the left we have the proletarians. So the non-indigenous choose to be in the private industry or the company because they can also contribute more for the growth, whereas the indigenous believe more in the public company. In the racial ideas that we have from last year polarization, indigenous are socialist and the non-indigenous are capitalist. Now, speaking statistically, 90% of indigenous have an informal economy to survive. This is a proletarian, and the non-indigenous have a 75% of formal economy. And typically, these are the employers, and they are seen in the racial arena as a bourgeois. Now, when there is this precise between the non-indigenous or I have my basic needs, it was a matter of time so that the ethnics started impacting politics from the process of the Marcha of the Lands in 1991 of Felipe Quiste in the highlands with the indigenous movement Aymara and the Bocalero movement from Morales have claimed political participation spaces to have economic inclusion spaces. This is what I call the politicization of the difference. That is that the common ascent that is reinforced when that belonging sense has a common destination. I'm indigenous because I am poor. okay, to stop being poor, I have to take ownership of the space for construction. And we have this. There is a positive correlation between ethnics and political socialization. So the sense of a common sense is differentiated in these two terms, ethnic and racial. So these are the results of the elections. These are the 2005 elections together with the results of the population census back in 2001 of these ethnics. And these are coefficients of a relation to see the extent of the affectation between one another. So in 2005, the correlation between I am Guarani, I am indigenous, and I vote for Voto Más, it was 0.928, meaning that 9 out of 10 indigenous people that said that they were indigenous in the census, they voted in 2005 for the Más party. So I have repeated this exercise in 2009, and the correlation is getting closer to 9 out of 10. This is a correlation, is 0.87. Actually, this is the same. I did the same exercise in the elections of 2014, where the correlation dropped, but it was still positive. That is, there is a trend of more to the elections more than a cause. From the technically differentiated communities and to vote for Más because of indigenous inclusion. And these same numbers are being repeated in the non-indigenous that are voting in same proportion and with the same correlation against Evo Morales' party.
This is a chart that allows us to see these correlation coefficients. This is a correlation of the provinces where we have the most population of Quechuas and Aymaras, and you have seen in the ethnicity row besides the vote in 2019. So look at this. In Aroma province, 96% from Más and 95 ethnicity. In Bautista Saavedra, 95, 97. So look at each one of these figures and you will realize that I'm not speaking about the vote for Más has the cause or the cause of this vote is precisely in the ethnicity. Now, Más vote is ethnical, rural, occidental, from the western, and the opposition is not dealing with ethnicity, urban, and this is from the not from the West. So if we can see, if we can call this in this way, the indigenous people, those that are Spanish speaking, have their historical, economic, and cultural competency. And this is the census of polarization. So this is the division of the opposing parties plus the Más party. And this has to do more with the ethnicity more than with political platforms. Why? Because they have a differentiated common destiny. So this, for example, in Cibescom, which is a body in Bolivia, had asked, or they have made a survey to people from La Paz to state out which is their preference in the way that they should organize the state or the country. And we have two different alternatives: the Republic that has disappeared before 2019, and the plurinational state, which precisely was born as fixed or adhered as of the political policy of this year. So these are the figures. 67% of those that have voted by Evo Morales in 2014, 90% were Aymaras, and they said that they prefer the plurinational state. And the Spanish-speaking people, those that are not they do not have an ethnicity, it's 76% of those have voted opposing to Evo Morales, and they said that they didn't have any ethnicity. And this is very important because when we made the survey, the Republic has disappeared almost for 9 years. So The relationship is in a context where there is an extremely volatile polarization, and this polarization is founded in these two different senses of the common origin and common destiny, and they are also represented by political proposals that are appearing in the mass in a corporate manner very vigorously, and they also appear in the opposing part or the opposing party. That's why between November 11 and 12 last year, we felt that there was a civil confrontation, because specifically on the nights of 11 and 12 of November, where the police and the army went out to the streets, the citizens were either partying because of Evo Morales was out, or the other way around, and that provided the sensation that there was two different communities that they were opposing because for the control of the country. So I completely share the idea that Marité was presenting, that the government has been a disaster in this polarization, precisely because it started her office by attacking the symbols that were representing the plurinational state. Now, the pandemic politicization was unavoidable. Pandemic also was polarized from the ethnicity and the racial issues that I have described previously. The ethnical polarization was the context for the politicization of the virus. Likewise, the affinity between the ethnicity and the social class have politicized the racism. So COVID was transformed in a political resource which fitted the previous polarization of the elections. So they were, for example, there was a predisposition of a population before the eventual arrival of the Russian vaccine, because the Russian vaccine was a part of what the ethnical communities wanted to have, and right now there is another part that is saying that this is a vaccine from the right or from the left, and also there were sectors that were not willing to abide by the rules of the health rules that we were posing, and this fed the idea that the indigenous sector was posing a threat. So pandemic started to be polarized along the same lines of the racial and technical terms to end it in an electoral scenario of 2020. So we had a differentiated common destiny. They was trending to use electoral competency to substantiate actions that are outside of the constitutional and democratic framework. And we also saw that there was a predisposition that to tolerate some authoritarian resignations, and the emergency sensation of the pandemic was increasing these racial differences. So I would like to end my presentation just by saying that along these lines, which are it's a very complex context, it's extraordinarily great that the Bolivian people were able to overcome all these threats, and that they have gotten and had a pacific electoral process, which is with successful results, and we should have to applaud the extraordinary work of the arbitrator that could have resulted all the way around. So it has shown that we Bolivians do not only have a democratic vocation, but we can overcome our differences. So I apologize for taking more time, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Rafael Loaiza. for this presentation, which explains such a complex topic like the division of a country, and these divisions are there or are present in many other countries, but some are similar and some are country specific. It is very clear that in the political processes, it depends a lot, or it is linked to the topic that we have addressed in the previous talk, when the political parties are acting in a responsible manner. Often this shows the example on the experience of many countries, and they are able to convey a message that is about a program that could be interesting for the different groups at the same times in different arenas. And we lose, quote unquote, a little bit of this division between what is ethic and what is not ethical and not ethical, and other kinds of differences that are created in other countries between the groups of the citizenships or the population. So right now, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Carlos Mesa, who is the former president of Bolivia. And for sure, he is going to share with us his vision of many of these issues and other different issues that we haven't addressed in this discussion. Mr. Former President, please. Thank you very much for this invitation. I am going to talk to you as a former president of Bolivia, acting as such, but I cannot avoid saying you that I am also talking to you as of the representative of the first force, which is the representation of the country, which marks lots of the protagonism that we are analyzing today. So regarding the great talk of Mr. Alce, I would like to highlight two things. Article 11 of the Constitution, which was approved last year, Article 11 states, Bolivia, the Republic of Bolivia, is adopting the participative, communitary form of government with the participation of all ethnicities. You know that 2009 Constitution has adopted the name of Plurinational State of Bolivia in order to have an autonomic system, but the Republic has not disappeared. This is our organization way, and with the specific name, it is acknowledged in Article 11 of the Constitution, without trying to diminish what Rafael has just explained. Second, we would like to remind you that in 2012, in the last census, 60% of Bolivian people said they reclaim not to be part of a party, and 40% claimed to be part of an ethnicity or a political party. So we establish that if it is true what Rafael is mentioning, the ethical identification is very important, but the last data that we have is 60% are non-indigenous people and 40% are indigenous people. Having said this, I would like to highlight a couple of points. Maria Teresa, in a very important manner, has mentioned that the starting point of this conflict started on February 21, 2016, when President Evo Morales back then backed the result of the referendum, or ignored this referendum, which had which was meaning that they were not in agreement with the constitution that he wanted to change in order to continue being a president for life. So this was a manipulation that allowed him to be part of the electoral process in that year. Thus, the renewal, quote unquote, of the social Movimiento Socialismo, it is not a relationship that was assumed by the mass, specifically placing Luis Arce of Evo Morales, but forced by the circumstances, the impossibility of Morales to achieve his goal to be in the power or in administration for life. Second, we have mentioned 2019 election as a critical movement without going into details. And I am quite surprised that when Maria Teresa was referring to the percentages of the votes of the opposition, is forgetting the result of 2019. In 2019, the result with the fraudulent manipulation by Evo Morales of the electoral process gave us a result, Comunidad Ciudadana, 35% of the votes versus 47%, of final vote versus 47% for Evo Morales. Back then, there was a huge fraud. The word fraud is the one which defines exactly what we lived and what I suffered as a candidate. If that fraud has not been made, we have been gone to a second round, and all the surveys indicated that my possibility of winning administration or the election was very high. Morales and the Socialismo movement, with a very paramount repercussion of sectors that have intellectual and coincidences, let us know that what in Bolivia, what they say that we live a coup d'etat in Bolivia, but that was not sure. So we submitted a report of several pages, and I would like to double highlight this, and it was backed by the European Union. In the European Union, in a document that was publicized in 2019, back up the report of the Organization of American States, which said that the country should go to a second round. So elections were annulled because there was a fraud, not because of a coup d'etat. And regardless of the value judgment of Janine Áñez, government from which I'm not a part, and I was not a part, and I was not an organizer, and I didn't share, and I didn't support. On the contrary, I think that the president back then made very serious mistakes that were in the detriment of the society. But the government is a constitutional government. The constitutional society was destroyed by Morales intentionally. He resigned also the president of the Senate, also the president of the House of Representatives, the first vice president of the Senate, and the first vice president of the House of Representatives, or the representatives, forced by Evo Morales. Why? To broke this constitutional chain. And besides of it, it was set out that in the successional chain, according to the court of Bolivia, this constitutional chain cannot be broken. So the second vice president of the Senate was the one that was going to have the chair. So I share the idea that this government was very negative. It polarized the country, but I would like to remind you that during the 14 previous years of Evo Morales, that polarization was very important, that manipulation was terrible. The use of the three powers, the three branches of the state as own was brutal, and the exercise of the judicial this judicial issue, or this judicial torment was part of it. So Comunidad Ciudadana, which is, I am the chair of that, is a democratic institution that believes in the constitutional values, that would like to recover the republican values of Bolivia, not because there is no republic, but because they have been set aside and destroyed by the Socialismo movement, We believe that the environment is the regulator versus the climate change, which is key to solve this issue in the world. We are convinced that that relationship of economy versus environment has to change this logic of the Bolivian economy based on an absurd element of the arbitrary use of natural resources, which the socialista movement is part of. And we are against, and we are fighting for this racism, against this racism. So I haven't done this description in order to do a campaigning or whatever. No, this is the theory. The electoral result is a result that it's not setting aside the evidence that Comunidad Ciudadana represents a renewal of proposal, a renewal of speech and democracy. And it's very surprising that they say that the opposition has a trend to personalize things, which Evo Morales is the first one who is personalizing things. Maria Teresa is talking about her concern about what President Arce can do. I don't know why. What's the question? What's to question about when the Secretary of Justice is telling you that they are going to make a reform, and 3 weeks from that he goes backward? And why? Because Evo Morales knows that Evo Morales knows that this is a torment that we can have. What are the questions that you should have in the Arce's government when the two houses, we are modifying these debates to discuss about the mandatory situation of these parties. Thus, authoritarianism of the present government is exactly the same as the previous government, and the question if they are capable to solve the economic crisis is yet to be answered. So the electoral process of 2019, the electoral fraud polarized the country, and during 18 days of resistance, the country expressed that they were not in agreement to that fraud, which made give rise to the resignation of Evo Morales. I'm not going to applaud the participation of the army or what the governor has done, but this is not disqualifying two things: the existence of the fraud, and second one, the constitutionality of Áñez's government. Because if there had been a coup d'etat, we should have had an army intervention or the imposition of one person that was not in the constitutional association, which didn't happen. So the electoral process, as described by the President Salvador Romero, was facing these serious circumstances of difficulty added to the COVID pandemics for the elections of 2019. And that process has several difficult moments. Rafael Loaiza has mentioned the hazard of a civil war, but the confrontation could have gotten to that very high degrees or more serious degrees if we haven't had this responsible process that we tried to be protagonists of. I don't want to remind you or tell you, if you don't know it, that we that we were not able to do this. We renounced to this constitutional right because we were victims of the fraud, with all the risks that meant, risks that created a result, as Maria Teresa has mentioned, very favorable, with 55% of the vote against 30%, a little bit less than 30%. When we, with the fraud, obtained 35% and around 38 or 39%. So that impact was paid, but not because we wanted to have all of our attention for us, but because the mass campaign intelligently said by Rafael Loaiza, place all the opposing parties to be in one chunk or in one arena. So in this make polarization more deep, and it stated a line that to divide the country in two different parts or in two ethnical visions. So that's what strengthened all this mass speech or discourse. I have described the basic values that we have to set out that this is not true, but the media are very, very big and very important not to speak about a very important factor in Bolivia, which is the regional factor, the impact of what the Santa Cruz department, its geographical location, and in the western part of the country, in the eastern part of the country, and maybe it doesn't mean anything about us. We are not speaking about the West intellectually or politically speaking, but of the geography of Bolivia. The West is from the Andes, and the eastern part is mestizo, white, but huge indigenous migration. Santa Cruz is a very important reality, and Santa Cruz created as of the resistance of the intent to remain for life in Evo Morales, a specific or a particular regionalism which set out the defense line of certain values, which had a huge rejection in the Andean voter. This was what didn't benefit the results, because what we had in Santa Cruz with a unifying discourse was destroyed by the one that was done by Fernando Camacho. But I would like to, you need to understand that the regional as well as the ethnical issues has a huge complexity in Bolivia. So in this arena, we carry out this 2020 electoral process, and it had been described by Salvador Romero very clearly, and it marked to procrastinate or to extend a government which made several mistakes. And the most important is that the president, the provisional president decided to be the president. I mean, somebody who was in charge of having a provisional government in order to have a result, to have an objective or a goal, a new electoral process, decides to be a protagonist. And this decision of President Yanez was completely negative for us, because it made easier the mass discourse to say that the reactionary right wanted to remain in office forever. And very late, she renounced to this candidacy. But this explains the result, not only the lack of leadership, of clear ideas, or the lack of discourse renewal. But if you have the opportunity, you can read in our webpage our proposal, which is completely different to the authoritarian government of Evo Morales, who is playing with the Mother Earth, which is playing with or which sets a line to extract the most brutal characteristics of people. Morales and Arce were benefited by 5 or 6 years of worldwide economic boom. But if we assess what income represented for that government, we can explain why fighting poverty had some positive results, even though its fragility has been questioned in this pandemic, COVID pandemic. So I believe that the 14 years of the mass government set an authoritarian discretionality and personality cult, and to make deeper this preference. Morales Morales' discourse was not an integrating one, and it has reflected very good by Rafael Loaiza. Morales said when he was announcing that the indigenous that was not true. The transition government didn't help to say that this was not true, but our discourse and our previous mark the way to inclusion that Morales should have closed. And this hatred speech that Rafael Loaiza said make these issues more profound or deep. So it would be very wrong from me not to acknowledge something very evident. More than 50% of Bolivian people have voted by mass. So this says that mass is the best political, economic, and social answer for Bolivia right now. Reasons that matter. We don't share this political criteria, and that's why we have participated in the election, and we have fought against this. The end of Evo Morales' office had to do with our campaign in 2019. Regardless of the circumstances, Morales is not a good president, and this is a very good point because the alternancy of powers is very important. This is something that has benefited for Comunidad Ciudadana. Once again, not to acknowledge that half of the Bolivian people have voted by mass. It would be not to understand which are our challenges, the necessity of articulating this based on society to go beyond the representation of the urban middle class, then the need to strengthen our links with the indigenous people in the line of our real structural thinking. We believe in that, but the worst of those social majorities has impacted a lot since this internal disaster of all this situation. And the cartels of Bolivia are backing Evo Morales as it were of a different territory. This distortion of power status and the constitutional vulnerability is part of the complexity that we have. So our challenge is to recover the Republican values, the separate, make independent the powers of the branches, to eliminate the judicial power, which depends on the orders of the executive. Today, the Supreme Electoral Court has a huge issue to resolve. The MAS has identified those candidates that could be most danger for them, and specifically the candidate to the mayorship of Cochabamba had a corruption history with a sentence that was executed very, very soon, which is the goal. I'm not going to discuss the legality or illegality of what the candidate of Cochabamba did, but he had more than 50% of the vote, and they could win Cochabamba, which is the third most important city of the country. And it's being done like as the Arce and Morales. I mean, the ticks of this destruction are not ticks from Evo Morales, are ticks from the mass of this party. They have to do with the way of government that is breaking the basic structures of equity, equality, and respect for the powers of the states. I agree with Maria Teresa that there is a dispersion because we have tried to make a statement of unity, and we achieved this in 2019, but the circumstances that she had described very well has placed us in a different context. But we have 50 parliamentaries. The socialism movement applies this absolute majority to eliminate the option of the 2/3 that are going to break arbitrarities with some elements that are defined along these lines. To oppose in a scenario like this one is not easy, because the control mechanisms of the powers of the branches of the state are in power of mass, and because the legislative power is a crushing machine. And even though this, we are going to work to construct, to build a democracy serious and committed to the citizenship. And the Bolivian context, and I agree with Salvador Romero, elections of 2019 and elections of 2020 have been undoubtedly the most difficult and complex polarized elections since the recovery of democracy in 1982. And it is evident that polarization lived in Bolivia is not broken and it's still there, but it's not less evident that elections were an element to relieve the pressure, even though we were victim of a fraud, even though we were bashed and insulted and falsely accused with one of the most dirty wars against a candidate on October 19, the next day of the electoral process. I lost the election, but I acknowledged the triumph of Luis Arce 24 hours after the election, when a very important part of my own political alliance or a partnership and a great part of the citizens that saw that the results was dashing asked me not to collaborate, but my democratic vocation and my responsibility as a citizen was above my particular or my personal interest and the citizens and the organized citizenship. So I think that that gesture shows what Manuel was mentioning about your responsibility as a political leader and our moderation to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your explanations and this analysis about the situation and this point of view as to which will need to be the development pathways to provide Bolivia or to build the institutions that do respect the democratic values. So we have finished the presentations or the conferences, but there are many questions from the participants. So I see that we have 8 questions that have been sent in writing. The first question is for Dr. Romero. Have the COVID people infected, the people infected with COVID have increased in numbers? Well, Dr. Romero, I don't know if, yes, you want to answer this question. Well, in a very brief manner, and of course, the elections didn't have a negative impact on the pandemic evolution. I do have some statistic data to share with you, and I can say that within the 3 previous weeks to the elections day, in a weekly average, we have 423 cases a week, 249, and 171 cases per week before elections day. So after the elections day, within the next 3 weeks, these were the amount of people infected: 154, 140, and 91. So this is the amount of cases in average that we had per week, daily and a weekly basis. So clearly, during the elections day, we didn't see any negative impact. Cases were dropped, and the citizens set the example. They did respect, all of the people respected social distancing. So I believe this was very important. when we tried to postpone the postponed elections in 2021, we will have this within 10 days. So yes, citizens had to feel that it was possible to combine public health protection with the full exercise of political rights for elections. Thank you very much. The second question, and this question is to all the speakers. And this is about this complex situation. How did you attain the population to trust the electoral order and to start to go to the polls specifically or peacefully? So yes, it would be very interesting to hear about the opinion from all the speakers, because they all have addressed different topics. So we want it also to share with us your perspective, your point of view to this. So Dr. Salvador Romero, can you start with this answer round? All right, so maybe it wouldn't be suitable to say that how everybody trusted this electoral body. Maybe the political stakeholders, they could submit some important information. But I think that one of the biggest achievements with this scenario, it's that the electoral participation was attained peacefully, with having a very heavy poll in the end. And on Monday, after the elections day, Monday was very peaceful as well. This is when where we share information, but there was an anxiety from the citizens before the elections day, of course, as to how the post-election scenario was going to be. But certainly the recognition of the results from the political stakeholders were key for peaceful elections day that gave us a result, no issues at all. Thank you very much. So, yes, who wants to share? Yes, I would like to state a couple of things. The first, I think that also the adherence to the results of the voting, we have three things. The first one, this is a democratic vocation that has been instilled in the people in Bolivia. Also, we have seen this in the oral historical events when there is lots of movement and it's facing this institutional situation. They have adhered to all this because they want everything to be peaceful. So this was in 2004 and 2005 when we decided to give the administration to Eduardo Rodriguez, or in other critical times as well. So I think that this is quite reinforcing this democratic vocation from the Bolivians. The second explanation, undoubtedly, is the authority of the electoral body. On one hand, because it was totally renewed activity-wise, which was disconnected from the other body that had this manipulation process in 2009. So it had a different profile. And also because in the pre-elections or before the elections, there was a reciprocity in the management of the process. So people trusted all this. And then the confidence to accept the results of the elections. And finally, the country was such in a critical condition that there was an urgent need to find a way out. Carlos Mesa was saying a decompression of that political confrontation through an institutional means. So we couldn't be postponing this transient government. We couldn't have it anymore. So the election created a good environment or scenario to solve the situation. So I think these are the reasons why we had a very good response from citizens in spite of the pandemic, but also the acceptance of results. After the elections, there were some standings from civil movements or groups that were demanding, because they were saying that it was fraud and that we had to review it. But these were not that general. So yes, that is my opinion about this matter. Thank you very much.
No sé si otros expositores quieren compartir sus ideas
Does
sobre
anybody else want to share their ideas?
Una explicación igual breve sobre lo que ha sucedido.
Okay, so an explanation. Okay, we had a polarized constituency from an ethnic and political standpoint over democracy. There was this idea of the risk of the pandemic that was creating anxiety, and also anxiety towards the other people. And on top of this, there was this election. By definition, it's a process where we can clearly see differences, and the competence increases anxiety. So let's think about the classical soccer game between Las Chivas or the River or Real Madrid and Barcelona. The previous party was annulled because at the 46th minute, the referee stopped everything because somebody kicked somebody else. So the people got into the court. Everything was stopped. But their agreement is, as Maria Teresa said, that we have an impartial arbitrator. So we brought the best one in the world. So Salvador represented that institutionality the country needed. So I believe he did it first by eliminating the suspicious towards security, partiality, and the partition side. So first, with the electoral justice processes, adhered to the institution and to law, and also to communicate all this to the society. He is one of the members of the Supreme Court of Justice that have communicated seamlessly with the press, and also to communicate clearly the processes which are related to the chain of custody, IT, the printing of ballots, etc. Also, the Supreme Court had this campaign to address anxiety on one hand from the pandemic, communicating good information, and on the other hand, a mobilization campaign towards the voting to diminish anxiety of people regarding racial matters. So election space was going to be a place to reconcile and to recognize, as the slogan said, the vote is like the embrace of that point of a meeting. As Maria Teresa said, Bolivians have this vocation towards solving our discrepancies or differences of a democracy, and also the Supreme Court has done so. It has been cleared about the processes. They have opened the information. They have mitigated anxiety, racial anxiety, through a campaign towards the vote, and they have created policies to reduce anxiety regarding the pandemic. Three points. The country realized that lives were at stake, and also the future was at stake after a long time. Second, Bolivia has this electoral historical tradition that is like a paradox, being a quite mobilized society that have faced the quite violent social movements during elections is like Switzerland. Since we had this democracy, there hasn't been an important incident or a loss of a human life in any electoral process since 1982, in that term only. and the Supreme Electoral Court acted as an independent body of the state. It's the fourth or body of the state, and it took independent decisions in the very difficult times regarding dates, setting up dates, and to define issues that were important for them. And this didn't happen in the Evo Morales term or administration. It was like the executing arm to perform all these improvements. Well, unfortunately, I think that time is up for this exchange. And I think that the rest of the questions that have been posted in the chat have been already answered by the speakers, but we could take one last question. And then we can wrap up. So I imagine that many of the participants in this session, as many people in the world think or ask, how how does the next elections will be organized within 10 days? The assignment process or many other elements could have an impact on the elections. So this is my question to all the speakers. Yes, I'm sorry. Let me start because I want to be brief. I think, yes, that this is it for the Supreme Electoral Court. We had this experience before. So, well, yes, we were asking for to postpone. So the technical arguments, I think that have to be in charge of them. Yes, thank you very much.
Dr. Romero.
Dr. Romero. Thank you. I think that we have to make a difference between the election back in 2020 and the elections in 2021. Why we postpone one and not the other? Taking a look at Bolivia, in 2020, Bolivia postponed his presidential elections due to this unknown phenomenon. And in Latin America also as well. And we felt the same, and we did the same to postpone the elections in Bolivia with different electoral processes in Latin America. Chile did it, Paraguay, Mexico, with the local elections into states, because we all wanted to see how we could react before this quite new phenomenon that was disorganizing the typical pace of societies. 2020 had this postponement effect of elections. In 2021, again, speaking about Bolivia, we can see that we are not having this postponement of elections. Ecuador will do that, Honduras, El Salvador, Peru, and Mexico as well, in order to be inside that group with those electoral processes in this first semester. So what has changed between 2020 and 2021? Somehow the electoral bodies and together with society, we have all learned to deal with this challenge that was quite new last year. So we have been able to apply protocols, public health that were proven effective. We have been able to show data. So the society learned how to integrate the electoral process and the election days with a set of activities that have led us to live normally. So yes, last year, all the public and private schools were closed up, and it was incredible. But with these elections, this is being done within a certain normality of social, economic, and political activities. So I think this was a very important element in order to vet or to keep the dates, the election dates. And just to finish my comment, we also learned 2020 lessons, not only from a health standpoint or the protocols that were being followed, but that we know that postponing an election is like open a Pandora box. We do not know when to open it, when to close it, or the cost of the closing of that Pandora box. So this was a very important or critical effort by the electoral body to keep the election date. So in general terms, I think that the country will be voting on Sunday, March the 7th, peacefully, regarding the pandemic and also regarding the same electoral process.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romero.
Pienso que llegamos al final de nuestro intercambio.
So we are reaching the end of this exchange, and in order to close up this so interesting session, and of course we could extend this for a longer time, but we have other duties to attend, and hopefully we will meet again in order to further this exchange session. But I would like to thank the speakers for today. And in order to close up this fifth seminar, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Raúl Contreras. Doctor, please. Thank you very much, Sergey. I just want to thank all of the speakers because we have learned a great deal about the election process from Bolivia. I took some notes because actually, yes, we have to use what we have learned. And yes, these were the most complex elections of history. And in Mexico, we are foreseeing that same effect as well, at least regarding the size or the challenge the pandemic is posing to us, being able to mobilize millions of voters throughout the country and to provide the suitable conditions in order to have the same results as Bolivia. First of all, we want to hold elections on the elections day. So in spite of all the difficulties and the pandemics, you have obtained 88.4 participation. This is a very good figure. I think it's important. It's worth mentioning. And the future effects, and not to have negative effects because of this virus, and not to see it as a justification not to attend the polling stations. So we are highly committed and very, very happy. Like Teresa said, citizens, the presence of citizens are important. Not only the participation of political parties is important. So yes, we agree that this is seen all over the world. This democratic idea, and yes, political parties have taken advantage of this era of having many parties, and the parties are, but parties are working very hard, and this is important. And also the excellent diagnosis by Rafael Valle about the segmentation of the population, the racial effect, and the confrontation that could end with civil war. However, you had a very peaceful process. The results were definitive. There was an exemplary behavior from the candidate that recognized results immediately, almost immediately, and mostly the fact and this is what is encouraging us in the university to continue studying these processes, the importance of an electoral process in spite of conflicts, in spite of all the negative effects, in spite of the brief government or the pandemic. Bolivia, it continues its history of having this peaceful election processes and the peaceful power transition and the non-intervention of army. And well, of course, Bolivia has not finished with this conflict, but in spite of it, they have been successful democracy-wise, and now Bolivia is achieving all this and is exercising all this. So we are thinking about what is going to happen in next election. This is a recognition, and I think all the speakers agree on this. The work of Salvador Romero, who is the head of the higher electoral court, who was critical. It was critical to provide certainty. So this is what we are expecting in Mexico, that the National Electoral Institute acts as the great stakeholder and to act as an arbitrator to build peace. Thank you very much, Don Carlos Mesa, Maria Teresa Segada, Rafael Loaiza. This has been a very, very good session, and congratulations, Sergey, because you for your nice moderation. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
¿Dónde la dejé? Justo ahora que son las elecciones más grandes de la historia. Y que como la mayoría decidí salir a votar. ¿Dónde la dejé?
¿Mamá?
Ay, hija, extravié mi INE y no sé qué hacer.
Tranquila, aún estás a tiempo de sacar una reimpresión idéntica. Es muy sencillo, puedes hacerlo hasta el 25 de mayo.
Estaba tan preocupada.
¿Mamá?
Voy por mi reimpresión y el 6 de junio salgo a votar.
El 6 de junio, el voto sale y vale. INE.